privacy doesn't have to be all or nothing. The inability to attain extreme levels of privacy shouldn't deter one from taking any protective measures at all. There exists a concept of just enough. We have to take a balanced approach to mitigating risk. And here's your host, Ray Heffer, a cybersecurity expert bringing you practical advice on securing your digital life.
Hello everyone, welcome back. This is episode 13 of The Lockdown, the Practical Privacy and Security podcast. Now, if you're new here, first off, welcome. I'm glad you're tuning into the show. Second, we're here to discuss the practical aspects of both privacy and security in our daily lives. I have a belief that if we don't do enough for our privacy, then we're going to be exposed, potentially falling victim to data breaches and identity theft, and perhaps worse. If we do too much, as evidenced by many posts on Reddit of late, people just find it overwhelming and simply give up. And you never know, it might just cause you to go insane. In today's show, I want to touch on Apple's iCloud private relay. It has been down since July 25th, but I will give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that it's going to be down for a day or two and then available again. But that's not what I want to talk about. I actually want to talk about why you should or should not use it and dispel some of the myths about what private relay is. Also, some good news. Back in June on my website, lockdown.media, I posted a complete guide to pfSense for privacy and security. Now, there are many guides to setting up pfSense out there. There are also several guides to setting up VPNs on pfSense, but I felt that none of them really came together with the goals that we have as privacy and security enthusiasts. Now, the guide goes into how to set up pfSense from scratch using one of the Quotum mini PCs. There's going to be some links in the show notes, and everything has links to Amazon in the guide. They're not affiliate links or anything like that. They're just my suggestions of what I personally do. And then finally, I want to end the show talking about privacy for kids. I am a father of 2 teenage daughters, and I think it's safe to say that I share some battle scars with many of you, and I must admit it can be a battle trying to get family members to understand the reasons behind some of these strategies. Now, I know some of you have been asking about Apple's iCloud private relay feature, wondering if it's something that I would recommend for privacy. Let's just break this down and see what we're really dealing with here. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, as of July 25th, private relay was impacted, causing an outage for many users. When you go to Safari, they can't browse the internet. Also, if you run an always-on VPN, which I'm going to be discussing next as part of the pfSense portion of this show, then you'll probably get an error trying to turn this on anyway. It's going to say something along the lines of your Wi-Fi is not compatible with iCloud private relay. To access the internet on this network, you need to turn off private relay. Now, where this is turned on or off, there's actually 2 places. First, if you go to Settings, click your name, and then go to iCloud, click on Private Relay, you can turn that on or off. Now, this is an iCloud Plus subscription, I believe that's what it's called. So you have to be paying for iCloud in some form of capacity anyway. Otherwise, this isn't going to be turned on. If it is, you'll also need to go to your Wi-Fi settings. And under your Wi-Fi settings, you will have an option for limit IP address tracking. Now, many of you have been asking about private relay and wondering if it's something that I would personally recommend for privacy. Let's just break this down, talk about what it is and what we're really dealing with here. Okay, so first off, private relay has been around for a few years now. I'm going to post a link in the show notes, which is Apple's iCloud private relay overview. Now, this is a PDF that they created in 2021, and it gives you an overview of how private relay works. Now, Apple claim many things when it comes to privacy. A lot of it is marketing. Now, what they claim with private relay is it will allow you to connect to the internet and browse with Safari in a more secure and private way. Sounds good, right? Well, not entirely. let's just dive a bit deeper and see what's going on. The core concept behind Private Relay is to separate your IP address from the websites you're visiting. And what they're doing is using what's called a dual hop architecture to achieve this. This is not the same thing as a VPN. So when you use Private Relay, what your device is actually doing is connecting to the first internet relay, known as the ingress proxy. This is operated by Apple. Now, here's the first thing you need to understand. Your original IP address is visible to this relay. But, and this is really important, the names of the websites you're requesting are then encrypted. So Apple or your ISP, they won't be able to see what websites you're visiting. Now, the second hop is what Apple calls the egress proxy. This is operated by third-party partners, from what I understand, which Apple describes as some of the largest content delivery networks in the world. So perhaps Akamai, Cloudflare, that type of thing. Now, this second relay assigns you a new IP address for your session, decrypts the website traffic that you've requested, and then completes the connection. Now, the key here is the second relay doesn't know your original IP address. Now, in terms of location, Private Relay does give you two options. You can maintain your general location or use the country and time zone. If you choose maintain general location, the system will assign you an IP address that maps roughly to your city level area. Now, I actually talk about geolocation and IP location in my other blog post called The Foundations of Digital Privacy Beyond VPN. So if you go to lockdown.media, you'll find that there. Now, if you use country and time zone, you'll then get an IP address allocated from a broader area within your country and time zone. So let's say I live in Seattle, I might get an IP from the San Francisco server, for example. Now, either way, you're not going to get the choice of your IP location that you would get with Proton VPN, for example. With something like Proton VPN, I can choose to be in Switzerland, the UK, San Francisco, Germany, wherever I want to be. Now, Apple, they make a big deal of this because they talk about how the relay IP addresses rotate over time and between sessions. In fact, if you change Wi-Fi networks or switch from Wi-Fi to cellular data, so will your relay IP address. Now, this is supposed to prevent the IPs from becoming a stable identifier to you, which is good. I fully endorse that. I think it's great. But remember, this is not the same thing as choosing your own VPN server with a provider such as Proton VPN. All right, so DNS, we need to talk about this as well. Private Relay uses something called oblivious DNS over HTTPS. ODO, I think that's how you say it. ODOH. Anyway, what this does is it sends your DNS queries through the first relay, so the DNS server can't identify you. And then each query is padded and encrypted, so even the first relay can't see what domain you're looking up. I think this is a solid privacy feature. I'll give them that. Now, here's something interesting. If you've set up custom encrypted DNS settings using a profile, perhaps with NextDNS or an app or something like that, Private Relay should use that instead of the oblivious DNS over HTTPS system. I will caveat that. I have tried using NextDNS on my kids' devices, and I'll talk about that later in the show, with Private Relay enabled, and it basically broke the internet. Now, that may be down to the outage, but it wasn't using the NextDNS settings. So Apple also has some built-in fraud prevention measures. I believe they're using a system of anonymous tokens based on RSA blind signatures. We're getting a bit deep here, but essentially these are one-time use tokens sent to each proxy when you connect. And the idea is to validate that you're a legitimate user without actually identifying you. Tokens and keys then rotate daily. I think that's a good practice. I'm not too fussed about that. Now let's talk about what Private Relay doesn't do. It doesn't cover everything. Private Relay only works on Apple devices with an iCloud Plus subscription. So if you're on the Apple ecosystem and you're paying for that, great. But if you're like me and you believe in diversifying your digital footprint, this is a problem. You can't use this on your Windows machine. You can't use it on your Android phone. It's just for your Apple devices with an iCloud Plus subscription. Now, the other issue is some networks can block Private Relay entirely. my home network included. So they actually use 3 domains. There's apple-dns.net, and then the other 2 is mask.icloud.com and mask-h2.icloud.com. I'll put those in the show notes so you can look them up. But in my case, I run Pi-hole, and those are blocked, so obviously it breaks Private Relay. So let's talk about logging. Apple claim that they have a minimal logging policy. Now bear in mind, this is not a no-log policy. I would trust someone like Proton VPN operating out of Switzerland more than I would Apple. Even with Proton VPN or Apple, even if they don't take any logs at all, what is stopping a court subpoena to say you need to turn on logging for this period of time so we can monitor this user? They still don't do logging generally on all their users, but they have to obey by the law. Now, they say they only log things like connection properties, performance metrics, and system resource usage. And they also log some info related to these tokens I mentioned. Now, they insist these logs don't contain unique identifiers. But I wouldn't take their word for it. We have seen so many occasions where data anonymization has failed. So what's my take on this? What's the bottom line? I think it depends on your threat model and your privacy goals. For my mother, for Auntie Annie, for whoever, for the people that are not into privacy and security, and they just get a headache if you even mention the word password manager, for example, then in that case, sure, Private Relay is good, turn it on. If they have an iCloud subscription, they're part of that ecosystem, it's fine, it's better than nothing. It does offer some genuine privacy benefits. It does separate your IP address from your browsing activity, which is good. And by the way, I forgot to mention this. This is browsing activity with Safari. If you install DuckDuckGo, for example, as the default browser, that is not covered by Private Relay. Again, this is not a VPN. It also says unencrypted traffic between apps will also go through Private Relay, but it's not clear exactly how that works or which traffic. So I believe anything that would be non-HTTPS, for example, would then get sent through Private Relay, so it's encrypted. That's great. And I think the use of oblivious DNS over HTTPS is great. It's a solid feature. I think the fact that it's built into the phone and it's easy to use just gets more people to take advantage and using it. At the end of the day, though, you're still trusting Apple with your IP address. This isn't like Mulvad or Proton VPN or any of the other VPN providers out there. You're also having to trust these unnamed third-party content delivery networks. I will assume Cloudflare or Akamai are part of that. I don't know that, that's just a guess. Also, the location controls are very limited compared to what you would get with a VPN, and it obviously only works on Apple devices with an iCloud Plus subscription. So my take, if you're the average user who's not doing anything particularly sensitive online and you're invested in the Apple ecosystem, sure, knock yourself out, turn it on and enjoy that until it goes down, of course, like it did yesterday. Now, it's certainly better than nothing. But if you're serious about privacy or you just want to take it that one step further, in fact, especially if you're a journalist, an activist, or anyone that actually needs robust, customizable protection, do not use it. For that category, I highly recommend a privacy-focused VPN like Proton VPN. This is a VPN provider that does not keep logs, allows you to choose your server locations, and will work across all of your devices, not just Apple products. Now, if you combine that with other privacy practices that we've discussed on this show, like Signal Messenger, for example, segmenting your online identities with unique email addresses, using privacy.com for payment, doing all of that, and overall being mindful of the information you share online, then you're going to be in a much better position. But I also want to say this, privacy isn't just about the tools you use. It's about the overall approach of how you interact with the tools and, more importantly, the technology. I think Private Relay is a step in the right direction for the mainstream, but it's not a silver bullet and it's not for me. All right, so back in June, I published the complete guide to pfSense for privacy enthusiasts. Again, if you go to lockdown.media, you will find the guide on there. Now, this is fairly comprehensive. I will walk you through installing pfSense from scratch. I actually include a video as part of the guide. I host it on Vimeo, so don't worry, I'm not tracking your Google account. I'm trying to be as privacy conscious as I can, without actually hosting the video and wiping out my bandwidth. But anyway, that's hosted on Vimeo. That's a walkthrough of the installation on a Quotum mini PC. And I think these are great devices. Now, you can buy, and I do mention this in the guide, a Protectly device. I know many of you have written in and asked me my opinion on Protectly in the past. And they are great. I think it's the gold standard if you're going to run pfSense. But that comes with quite a hefty price tag. They are quite expensive. I actually own 2 Quotum mini PCs. I bought the second one because it was taking me so long to write the guide. I needed a second device to actually walk through the setup myself and make sure I'm getting everything right. And I couldn't do that to my primary router because obviously I'm going to take the internet down for the wife and kids, and I'll be very unpopular if that's the case. Now, before you dive into the pfSense guide, if you are newer to this kind of thing, I would recommend reading my blog post on the foundations of digital privacy beyond VPN. And the reason being is I want you to understand the role of DNS, and I want you to understand VPNs are not for anonymity. There's a lot of misinformation out there surrounding VPNs, which I touch on in my blog post. Now, what's the point of having an always-on VPN? Because if you use Proton VPN, for example, and use their client software, you can set it to auto-start with Windows. So that's good, right? Well, not really. Any device, as soon as it boots up, will start chattering over the network and over the internet in particular. So let's take Windows as an example. As soon as Windows boots up and the networking stack is started, so this is literally just before you get to the logon screen, it will start communicating over the internet. Some of this stuff is quite harmless. It's doing some broadcasts on the network. It's looking for an IP address using DHCP. Windows devices are notorious for what I call chatter. If you actually monitor the network traffic with a tool like Wireshark, you will see it go nuts. But it's some of this chatter that does concern me. It's communicating with Microsoft services out there in the cloud. Some of this is quite harmless. It's looking for the latest updates for Windows. It might be looking for some signature updates for Windows Defender. That's fine, but all of that communication is occurring before your VPN software, if you're doing this with a client, has had a chance to connect. Now, let's just take this a bit further. Let's say you've logged into Windows. Windows has done its chatter. Your real IP address is revealed to Microsoft. But let's say you use Adobe Suite. Adobe's pretty bad, actually, with running background services and startup services. So that's communicating with Adobe servers, checking that your license and goodness knows what else, revealing your real IP address. Let's say you have Spotify installed. You like listening to music, and that is starting with Windows. Now, Spotify have your real IP address because that started running in the background, again, before your VPN client has had a chance to connect. Dropbox, maybe use Dropbox. You can see what's happening now. You've now got this huge footprint of cloud services that know your IP address before your VPN's even connected. Now, the purpose of the pfSense guide is this. The VPN connection is running all the time on the router. And by the way, I've lived in the US for 8 years, so if I keep switching from router to router, just ignore me. It's a bad habit I've got into. But anyway, pfSense has that VPN connection running all the time. If the VPN goes down, if you follow my guide, you will not get defaulted back to the WAN, back to your plain IP address. Your internet traffic will stop. And the way that's possible is through the firewall rules. I only allow external traffic through that VPN interface. So if that's down, it's just dead. So I don't really like the term cutoff switch, but that's essentially what it's doing. Now, the other benefit of this, of course, is now all the devices on your network, whether that's on Wi-Fi or wired, it doesn't matter, well, they all go through pfSense to access the internet. So therefore, they're all behind that VPN. Now, the other reason I use a VPN, internet providers, especially in Europe, but I've seen this in the US as well, are issuing warnings to their users about using torrents and pirating movies, music, or other software. Now, your ISP is partly to blame because they're trying to curb copyright infringement, but I'd actually say it's more to do with companies like Warner Brothers. They've been involved targeting these file sharers directly. They're working with DMCA, that's a Digital Rights Corporation, or Digital Rights Copyright Act, to send these notices to alleged infringers. And torrent software like qBittorrent, which is a great bit of software, if you've got that set up to start with Windows, and that starts before you've connected on your VPN client, then again, you see what's happening. It's just revealed your real IP address is associated with a torrent download, for example. Now, really, for me, this is just a safety net. I just don't want my real IP address being caught up. Back in the day, I don't do this as much anymore, but I used to play a lot of online video games, whether that be, I think back now, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Escape from Tarkov. I admit I do enjoy a video game. Many years ago, and we're talking probably about 20 years ago now, I did have a case where a user, someone I know, was booted off of the game. They actually had a DDoS attack made against them. Now, DDoS is a dynamic denial of service attack. I thought, well, how on earth did they get this guy's IP address? And it wasn't actually through the video game itself. Some video games, when you're playing online, is peer-to-peer, so you can run against something like Wireshark and see who's connected, potentially the IP addresses of the other players. But no, in this case, they were using something called a Skype resolver. I don't think that's a thing these days. I might be wrong. Does anyone use Skype? I don't think so. But Skype used to be used by a lot of people. And a Skype resolver, you could literally go online. There was various Skype resolver services. You could type someone's Skype username and it will give you the IP address that they're connected with, which most of the time was their ISP IP address. And I include this in the nothing to hide argument on the blog. Cardinal Richlow did say, if you give me 6 lines written by the hand of the most honest men, I will find something in them which will have them hanged. Now, I like that quote because even if you don't think you're doing anything wrong, do you really want your IP address in data breaches, in logs all over the place? I don't. In fact, talking about 20 years ago, this is probably the early days of probably the not so ethical hacking. It was very easy to do a port scan on a range of internet IP addresses and find Windows computers, file shares that weren't locked down, routers, whatever you want to call it, that were using the default admin username and password. These are all reasons to hide your real IP address. So I would say this, if you are brand new to pfSense, hopefully you can follow the guide. Either way, I think this guide offers something for both newcomers to pfSense and also to the more experienced. This is a complete walkthrough. All right, the next topic I think is an important one. What do we do as parents and as privacy enthusiasts to keep our kids safe online while maintaining privacy? So I'd like to try something here. I'd like you to pause the podcast and go to noescaperoom.org. Obviously, if you're driving, don't do that. You focus on the road. But if you can, go to noescaperoom.org. I'll put a link in the show notes. I'd like you to play the interactive video. It will take no more than 7 or 8 minutes. When you've done that, come back. So if you've done that and looked at the website and the interactive video, it's probably touched a nerve, no matter if you're a parent or not. Now, this section of the podcast isn't just about keeping your kids safe, but it's also about giving them the tools to navigate what I consider an increasingly complex online world. And I think to do this, we need to break it down by age group. So we're going to have 3 phases here. Phase 1 as a parent, the young ones. I'd say this is between the ages of 0 and 8. Perhaps 2 and 8 would be more precise. At this stage, as parents, you're in control, or at least you should be, in my opinion. Your main concern is likely just access to video games on consoles, tablets, things like that. Now, I think lockdown is key. We need to use parental controls. iPads and iPhones and the Apple ecosystem in this case is actually a good thing. I know that sounds strange coming from a privacy enthusiast, but it is. I think let's use screen time to its full potential. You can disable access to the App Store to block the installation of new apps. You can enforce time limits or even enforce downtime. And I still have this in place with teenagers. Do this as long as possible. I would also remove access to Safari and the Mail app. At this age, this is up until the age of 8. They don't need a web browser, and they certainly don't need to have access to email or installing apps. This is essentially creating a walled garden or a safe space. So have a selection of age-appropriate apps and games. Don't just rely on age ratings though, do your homework. Have a look online and see what is good, acceptable, and not going to cause issues. Now also, never let your kids use your personal devices. When one of my daughters was very young, she had this nasty habit of grabbing someone's phone and then she would then go and delete photos. Just random pictures, just go in and start deleting them. Yeah, I think that the saying here, as soon as your device has been picked up by one of your kids, you have been compromised. Also, educate them early. As they get older, they turn from everything you say being right to everything you say being wrong. So make it a regular conversation, not just this one-time lecture, and they're like, oh, Dad, or oh, Mum, this is boring. Okay, phase 2. I'd say this is the tween age. So once they're 9 to, say, 13 years old, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. Because social pressure and peer pressure does kick in, and this fear of missing out is very real at that age. I would delay social media as long as possible. Now, I know it's easier said than done, but remember, most platforms do require the end user to be at least 13 years old. You will be shocked at how young a lot of these kids are that are on TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and all these other sites. Stand your ground as long as you can. Now, if you cave, and let's be honest, I'm sure many of you will, create the accounts with them. Use a dedicated email address that you control, preferably with your own custom domain. Use something like Simple Login to do this. So you have an alias, set up two-factor authentication, and go into the app and make the privacy settings as strict as possible. Now also, I think it's really important to do this with your kids and also explain why the username should be fairly unique and doesn't identify them. And tell them as well, don't post pictures at all if you can help it. But if they're going to post any pictures, not to have anything that's going to identify your location. That could be a house next door, the corner showing a street sign. All of this can be found very easily online. We all know about open source intelligence and OSINT. Show them how easy it is to do that. In fact, I'll often go through an OSINT challenge with my kids and saying, bingo, we've found that person just based on a photo. Perhaps there's a building in the background or some landmark. And I'll be honest, I'm quite proud because now if they do post a picture, they make sure it's just trees or something really nondescript in the background, just to limit the risk of that. Now, the advice and the best thing to do would be not to have your kids on social media in the first place. But I've seen this firsthand at my daughter's schools. They're all on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. And what's more frightening, I've witnessed the kids do this. They just create their own accounts. They've got no idea in some cases what email address they used. And shame on the social media apps that don't verify the email. They've just made up an email address and password and they've got in. As a privacy enthusiast, I really have a dislike for monitoring software. So I'm not going to recommend it. There are parental control apps and monitoring software to see what your kids are doing. And I think, no, don't do that. I honestly think they're more of a security risk than they are about protecting your kids' privacy. I think using embedded controls with iPhone, like screen time, is far more effective. And I'm going to talk about another method with NextDNS as well in a moment. But before that, teach them critical thinking. Get them to understand why certain posts or images might be inappropriate or dangerous. One of the things I've told my kids from the beginning is everything they post online, every picture, every comment is going to be there forever, even if they delete it. In fact, I told them about the fappening. This was probably almost about 10 years ago now. It's going back quite a way, but before iCloud was as secure as it is today, iCloud accounts of celebrities were getting compromised and nude pictures were leaked all over the internet. All right. Now, if you can, keep mobile devices, tablets, things like that in common areas. A really good idea is at bedtime, no phones or tablets in bedrooms, have a family charging station in the kitchen, in the living room, just somewhere in a central location, and put them there. Now, I'd say in this phase, the tween phase between ages of 9 and 13, again, there should be no access to the internet, no web browser, no email. But this is where it gets tricky. Teenagers, 13 and up, phase 3. We're in the big leagues now. They need more freedom. Perhaps the school is requiring them to do research. They need to do their homework. They want to get access to the internet. I found it's not so much of they need access to the internet. It's not the pressure they're getting like they are with social media. That's more in phase 2. The internet to a teenager isn't that interesting. I'll be honest. It's social media is where it's at. So I would introduce this properly from the beginning. I would personally install DuckDuckGo as a default browser. And now if you pair this with NextDNS. Now NextDNS, in fact, some of you have actually written in and asked me my opinion on NextDNS, just for us, not for kids, just generally for an alternative to Pi-hole or something like that. I don't use it. Personally, I just prefer, if I'm going to do any sort of DNS blocking, that I self-host all of that, so I use Pi-hole. But for kids, I think it's essential. Now you can do a number of things. You can install the NextDNS app for Windows or Mac, Android, iOS, there's Linux, there's all sorts of support out there. Or you can just do what's called linked IP. So it links your public IP address with your account. And then if your kids are using that public IP address, you can set up restrictions on the DNS side. So basically, under parental control, you can block porn sites, gambling, dating sites, and piracy. You can set up recreation time, safe search. You can restrict YouTube. There's a lot you can do. I'll leave that up to you. I'm not going to dictate what's allowed, what isn't. But let's say you're just going to block adult sites. Great. The way you would set this up for kids' tablets or iPhones, things like that. Personally, I would install what's called a configuration profile. So if you go to apple.nextdns.io, it's a different process for Android. They've got a setup guide on their website. But if you go to apple.nextdns.io, you can set up a profile, let's say kids, type a device name, and then it downloads the actual profile. You do need to open this in Safari. It will give you a short URL or a QR code you can scan. Now, I've said use DuckDuckGo as the default browser, but Apple, the iPhone, doesn't know what to do with it. If you open it in DuckDuckGo, it doesn't know that this is an Apple file. If you open in Safari, it will say this is a device profile. Would you like to install? And you can install that profile. That means whether they're at home on the Wi-Fi network, at school, using 5G, cellular data out there, that all traffic will still go through NextDNS and you can still block adult sites. The linked IP option. You want to set this up for a dedicated kids Wi-Fi. So on pfSense, you would have this Wi-Fi network or VLAN with their own IP range and DNS set to NextDNS. So when you log into your NextDNS account, it will give you 2 DNS servers, such as 45.90.something. You've got your primary and your secondary there, and it will have a linked IP. Now, in my case, when I log into NextDNS, it gives me the linked IP of my VPN provider. The kids' Wi-Fi is not using VPN. So what you have to do, you either have to install the app on their devices, such as the NextDNS app on iPhone, Apple Mac, iPad, whatever it is. Or, this is what I do. And this will get more technical now, but in pfSense, if you go to System, Package Manager, and click on Available Packages, type cron. Now, if you haven't got this installed already, you can install the cron package. Now, if you're familiar with Linux, you'll know all about cron. But once that's installed, you can go to Services and click on cron. When you go to add jobs, you click Add. It will ask you for the minute, hour, day of the month, month of the year, day of the week, user, and the command. So minute, I set to 0. Hour is 2. So basically, this is 2 o'clock in the morning. Day of the month, you put an asterisk. Month of the year, asterisk. Day of the week, asterisk. So basically what that says is every day at 2 o'clock in the morning, it will run the following command. So user, you put root, and then command. Now the command is curl, so that's CURL, space, hyphen, so 2 dashes, interface, so that's all one word, hyphen, interface, space, IGB0. Now that's the interface name. So if you follow my pfSense guide and you've installed pfSense on a Quotum mini PC, that will be the interface name. If you have a different device, that interface name may change. And then you add -s and then another space and then the URL. Now you're going to get the URL from NextDNS. And on the setup page on the right hand side, it has linked IP. If you click Show Advanced Options, it says you can also programmatically update your linked IP by calling, and it gives you a URL. It starts with link-ip.nextdns.io / and then there's your unique identifier and another like an API key. So if you copy that and paste that after the curl -s command and click save, now at 2 o'clock in the morning every day, your pfSense router will call that command and basically tell NextDNS what your public IP address is. Now I'm going to assume here your kid's Wi-Fi network is not using always-on VPN, because one of the things kids love to do is watch Netflix, and it will cause problems if you start using VPN. So I just leave that as an ISP, plain internet connection. So now that IP address is associated with NextDNS. So any other devices that they connect on the kids' Wi-Fi, such as a school laptop, or their friend comes over if they give them the Wi-Fi password, that's also going to go through NextDNS, which has parental controls. Again, doing it that way won't work outside of the house. That's just for devices on your home network, which is why for iOS or Android, you need to follow the setup guide and install that so you can identify your devices. Now, the great thing is with it, there's also analytics. You can see what's been blocked. There's logs. That's great. And I think for kids and online safety, this is great. For me personally, I don't use it. I want to self-host everything, as I've said before. So I run 2 Pi-hole instances to block malware and advertising, things like that. That's internal. Yes, it doesn't work when I'm out and about on cellular data, but I don't need it. I use DuckDuckGo as my browser, and my browsing is fairly limited while I'm out anyway. So, okay, that's what I would recommend as soon as they have access to the internet. Now, that phase 3, the 13 and up phase, I've said about that, DuckDuckGo, I would also teach them about data privacy. Show them how to check app permissions and say to them, if you do install an app, they shouldn't have access to do that anyway, but do show them the risks of allowing access to contacts, for example. And also discuss the risks of oversharing, how seemingly innocent posts can be used against them by stalkers, bullies at school, or even future employers. Now, I use Signal as my primary messenger. So if my kids or my wife or anyone in my family wants to message me, they have to use Signal. I think as long as you can avoid them using messaging apps like WhatsApp, the better. But I think the lesson we can all learn from this is having kids and trying to establish any form of privacy and security is a living nightmare. It's certainly given me a headache in the past, but this is why we maintain separation. I have a separate VLAN, separate Wi-Fi, separate devices, and even separate DNS servers. So see how far you want to take it. If you can encourage the use of secure messengers like Signal, and even talk about VPN, talk about privacy, they will thank you later in life. But for now, they will say you are the most boring parent on the planet. Okay, before we end today's show, I want to move on to some listener emails. So I had an email here saying that they've been using Joplin for quite some time. But what I shared on a previous episode about losing Joplin data and Joplin using a proprietary file format that can't be transferred to other note apps had me very concerned. So just before I continue reading that email, probably a misunderstanding there. I was actually talking about Joplin and standard notes. So first off with Joplin. Now my requirements may be different to a few of you out there. Personally, I expect notes, especially when they're in a plain text format like a .markdown file, I want to see them on disk as they are in the app. This is why I love Obsidian. I can create a folder in my Nextcloud directory called Notes with a whole bunch of subdirectories and notes files in each of those. And sure, that's unencrypted, but I'm actually using full disk encryption on my main machine. So when I shut down, that's fully encrypted. What Joplin does with encryption is actually quite good. You can go to enable encryption, you add a master password, that's your decryption key, and then you can encrypt all your notes. What I don't like, though, is a number of things. First off, it appears that Joplin stores all of your Markdown files in a proprietary format as part of an SQLite database. So yeah, that's on disk, but I can't do anything with that, not easily anyway. And then as far as synchronization is concerned, it has support for Joplin Cloud, Dropbox, OneDrive. You can use your local file system, Nextcloud, WebDAV, Amazon S3, I think that's in beta, and another Joplin server, which is beta as well. I'm not familiar with those. So let's just start with file system. I can provide a path to my disk. So if I do that now, I have Markdown files, but the actual file name is a random bunch of letters and numbers. It's just some string of characters. So I can't easily find my file. Now, when I open that file, again, there's a proprietary format in there. There's longitude, latitude, author, source URL, to-do queue, all the stuff that is built into Joplin. If you enable encryption, it also adds the encryption ciphertext, so you won't be able to read the format. Great, that's how it works. But for me, that's no good. I don't want to rely on this proprietary format because should something happen to the Joplin app, there's no way I can get to my files. Now, sure, if you back them up to Markdown, but then it kind of defeats the object because then where are you going to back them up to? I just want them in the original format on disk. The great thing is with Nextcloud and using, whether I use Notepad, Obsidian, Vim in Linux, it doesn't matter what I use and from what any machine I use it on. If I add a note or change a note, it's within a second or two, I see it synchronized to my other devices and the notes are updated there. Now, why that's useful for me, I use Obsidian and I have a folder for work notes. It's for my day job. And if I add a note on my personal computer, it's a Markdown format and make a change to a note, Nextcloud syncs that across all my devices, including my work laptop, and it's there within a second. If I have to rely on Joplin, that's a separate synchronization mechanism that for me just adds further complication. And then the other comments I made were mainly around Standard Notes. Again, a great app, but similar problems. I don't want to deal with some proprietary format on disk. I had no way of doing a mass import of Markdown files and keeping them as Markdown files. So for me, Obsidian, VS Code, any app I use is great. I have full disk encryption on my PC. Nextcloud is using encryption in transit, and that's good enough for me. That said, if I was to start over from the beginning and it wasn't for Nextcloud, I would probably look at Standard Notes once more. Okay, so another email, same person here, saying, been enjoying the podcast. Thank you so much for the kind comments. And you listened to the Optory podcast recently and decided to check out the privacy policy. First off, pat on the back. Kudos to you. Not enough people read the privacy policies. I do, and I'm glad you did as well. You actually pulled out two sections, I think section 8 and section 13. And one of them mentions service providers to monitor, analyze, support, secure, etc. And then they go on to list privacy invasive companies like Amplitude, Google Ads, Marketing, Reddit. You haven't mentioned this, but I noticed on the policy there was LinkedIn as well. So I would say this. First off, if you're going to use Optory or Delete Me or any of those sites, I would imagine, and I'm not 100% here, but I would imagine they all have very similar privacy policies. Don't give any more information than is already out there. So don't give copies of ID or date of birth, things like that. Just give the information that's already on these people's search sites. Now, as for these privacy policies, so often, and this is what I don't like about privacy policies, they're all encompassing. In other words, it means the privacy policy applies to their website. The fact they're using analytics on the website and they use other service providers such as AWS or Amplitude, there's telemetry. I've even seen privacy policies that apply to the website, a mobile app and various other things. So it's very hard to to understand, well, actually, what is the privacy of just the service I'm using? And I think a lot of these privacy policies are written by lawyers. In fact, I know they are, and they're there to cover themselves. But I think you raise a valid point. What are they sharing with Google, marketing sites, Reddit, LinkedIn, even Meta was mentioned? I will email Lawrence, who's the CEO of Optory, and I'll ask the question, so I will report that back on a future episode. But yeah, great question. Okay, another email here, someone else, as I love the show, found out about it on Tech Law or the Privacy Guides forum. Thanks for making it. Well, that's great. I didn't know it was discussed there. Hopefully people do like it. Now, you're asking me if I'd heard of or checked out JMP Chat for an alternative phone service or data plan SIM. Yes, I have in the past. I must admit I never used it. Yeah, there's also VoIP.ms. Now, I haven't used VoIP.ms or JMP Chat, mainly because I'm just very happy with my pseudo. However, you do raise an important point here. If my pseudo were to disappear, I would probably be in trouble because I do use it a lot. I have, as I said before, a secure number just for traveling, another one for banking, another one for work, and one for personal. I'm on the pseudo Max subscription. But yeah, if they were to vanish overnight, I would need an alternative. So I'm going to add your suggestions to my list, and when I check it out, I will definitely report back. Okay, another email here. Writing to express sincere appreciation for the podcast. Your efforts have not gone unnoticed and want to thank you for the hard work. There's a lot of kind comments here. One thing I would ask, if you like the podcast, if you can give it a review on Apple Podcasts, I think that's really the only thing that matters these days. That would be great. Even if you just add a star rating, that would really help a lot. Unfortunately, the way these algorithms work, if someone was to search for privacy in the Apple Podcasts app, unless it's got enough ratings, it probably won't come up at the top of the list. So anything you can do to help with that would be greatly appreciated. And obviously, if you're running Graphene OS and the Antenna Pod app for podcasts, you can't review it. So amazing. I think that's great. Don't go and buy an Apple device just to review this. But perhaps you know someone with an iPhone, you can just say, I don't know, steal their iPhone and do a review for me. No, actually, don't do that. Don't steal anyone's phone. But yeah, if you can access an Apple device and give me a rating, that would be great. Now, our good friend Harry Potter has also emailed. Again, this was back in June. So Harry, you're a wizard. No, Harry, I apologise for taking so long to reply, but you did follow up on using credit cards with an alias name. And you said you've had a lot of luck with Chase. I had failed miserably with American Express. I filled out their forms. I called them. I tried all sorts of things just to have a different name. They would not budge. So yeah, I think Chase is the next thing I'm going to try. Haven't tried it yet, just been so busy being on the road, but that's something I'm going to do. So really, I've been relying on privacy.com as well, probably too much. So that and my pseudo, we need to find some alternatives. Not that we need to switch, but just so we have a backup, an alternative out there. Now, I won't read the rest of the emails. I've had some great comments and some excellent suggestions, so I'll probably tie those into a future show. So if you do want to get in touch, you have two ways. You can email lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com, or you can go to lockdown.media, click on contact. It says it's for business inquiries only, but honestly, I don't mind. You can fill out, make up a company name, put your name and email in there, hopefully an alias name, and your message, and that will also come straight to me as well. And finally, as I've mentioned before, I've created a Patreon page. This is entirely optional. You don't have to do this, but if you do go to patreon.com/the lockdown, you can join for free. You don't have to pay a penny. And if you do want to support the show, there are 3 tiers. There's Tinfoil Hat at $3 a month, and that will show you're a supporter of the show and also add you to this private Patreon community. There's the Ghost tier, $5 a month. And that tier, I will give early access to the podcasts when possible. Sometimes, like this podcast, I will actually post it same day. But most of the time, I will post that at least a few days, even up to a week early. And then if you're feeling very generous, and I don't expect you to do this, but there's the redacted tier, $15 a month. And that just really helps me pay for the cost of running the show. But all of that is optional, or you can just send me an email and say my show sucks, whatever you prefer. So I'm going to end it there. I'm going to start my weekend because we have UFC 304. I'm a huge MMA fan. Saturday night in England, we have 304 with Edwards versus Muhammad. So I'm going to be watching that. Whatever you're doing, enjoy your weekend, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.